When I do on-camera training, often I am working with people on their teleprompter skills, which is, if you're not familiar with it, when you're talking to a camera and you have your words that you're supposed to be saying in front of the camera so that it looks like you are just looking directly into the camera, but you see the actual script that is scrolling in front of you. And this is a skill that most of us do not innately have. And it becomes readily apparent when I do the first exercise I do with them. For that teleprompter training, I have them first do a version of a story that they're telling just off the top of their head, speaking spontaneously. And typically that goes pretty well. It's a story that they, know well. They don't have to come up with a scripting for it per se. And then the second half of that is they have to deliver part of a presentation that is fully scripted and appears on the teleprompter, and they have to read it word for word. That typically does not go very well. And the participants in this training always say, oh my gosh, that is so much more difficult to do. Why is that? Well, that's one of the things that we talk about in this teleprompter training. And I want to share with you how you can make it easier if you're encountering that situation so that you appear as authentic and natural when you're speaking to a teleprompted script versus one that is just coming off the top of your head. That's in today's Speaker Tips Spotlight. Stay tuned. Hi, I'm Karin Reed. I'm a 4-time author, Emmy Award-winning broadcast journalist, and communication expert on helping people to own the room, whether it be a physical one or a virtual one. Welcome to Speaker Dynamics. How to use a teleprompter. Probably not a course that was on your list in business school or really in any other sort of profession that you were preparing for aside from maybe news anchor or on-camera spokesperson. But now, because we are using video in so many different ways, teleprompter skills are becoming more and more important. But most of us don't know how to do that well. So today I want to give you my top 3 tips on how to navigate the teleprompter. I'm going to call it tackling the teleprompter. So the first tip is that you want to write the way you speak. So a lot of times what I'll see people try to do is they'll take something that was intended just to be read silently, think about like a press release or even some verbiage that you have on a Word doc or that you've put on your website, and they stick it into a teleprompter script and expect to be able to perform it well. Okay. That often does not go well, because whenever you are speaking something that is intended to be read silently, it presents all sorts of challenges for you to actually wrap your mouth around the words. We don't use proper rules of grammar when we are speaking. Typically we're, cutting off sentences. Sometimes they're not full sentences. Maybe we end a sentence in a preposition. Oh no. And that is something that we usually don't do if we're just writing it to be used as something that you just read silently. And if you try to translate that into what you're trying to give voice to, it can really be challenging. So in order to kind of break the rules of grammar, you almost have to, write it out loud. So for example, what you would see if you walk into a newsroom, oftentimes you see people who are seemingly talking to themselves. They're talking to themselves and they're typing at the same time. And the reason why they're doing that is because they want to make sure that the words that come out of their mouth when they ultimately perform it are easy to say. And there's no way to be able to test that out except to actually give it voice as you're composing it. So what I would recommend to you is make sure that you write the way you speak. So rather than perhaps sitting down and silently typing out your script, maybe you want to dictate it. And that way you actually are using the words in such a way as you would if you were just speaking to it spontaneously. It'll make it so much easier for you to perform as a result. Second tip, mark up your script in the teleprompter. So what do I mean by that? Well, if you will look at a typical way people will put their script into a teleprompter is it's just like a wall of words. And it's so easy to get lost in that wall of words. So what you want to do is figure out a way to give your eye something to, hook onto. So what I like to do is I will mark the meaning words in each sentence. So for example, I'll look for the most important word in each sentence and I'll either underline it, or sometimes I'll bold it, or sometimes I'll put it in uppercase. And it gives my eye something to grasp onto into that phrase, into that wall of words, and it kind of breaks it up. So that also will remind me to emphasize the critical meaning words, because oftentimes when we read, we narrow our delivery, we narrow our vocal range. And instead of having all this variety where we're going high and low, and we naturally do that in common conversation, just casual conversation, instead, when we read, we tend to speak in a bit of a monotone and we don't have that vocal variety and change in inflection. So if you underline critical meaning words, it will remind you to emphasize certain key words that you want people to have, picked up by their ear. And oftentimes when we see an underlined word, we emphasize by changing our pitch. So I want you to think about how you can go through your script and mark it up so that you're underlining for emphasis, or bolding for emphasis, or, capitalizing for emphasis. The other way I'd mark it up is by creating opportunities to pause. So oftentimes people will have a tendency to just kind of read as quickly as the words come up on the screen because they're afraid that those words will disappear. They're scrolling up, they're off the screen and they freak out. So in order to force yourself to sit in some silence and give your audience an opportunity to take that information in, I like to create breaks. And you can do that in a variety of ways. Sometimes you can use ellipses that signals to you, hey, I need to pause here at least for a beat to give my audience an opportunity to let the words I say sink in. Sometimes I will create like breaks by, hitting return so that there is physical space in the teleprompter, which reminds me to take a break. If I am working with a client and they do not pause, they just can't get themselves to do it, I will use the ultimate option of creating several return spaces so that there's no other words on the screen until they start to scroll from the bottom. And that way they can't read too quickly because there's just not enough available on the screen for them to read it. But come up with a way to force yourself to pause because it'll make a big difference in how you sound. We pause all the time. We don't continuously speak stream of consciousness. Typically, when we're in casual conversation, you want to be able to create that in the teleprompter by adding those pauses in a more mechanical sort of fashion. So the third tip, the last tip that I want to share with you is to move. Because sometimes what I'll see happen is people will get very nervous whenever they're speaking to a teleprompter and they tend to hold themselves super stiff. And when you hold your body stiff, guess what? It stiffens up your delivery as well. So if you're somebody who naturally uses your hands to talk or naturally just moves around, allow your body to do so. Because if you try to hold yourself stiff, then you're not going to find that the words come out of your mouth as easily. We communicate with our words, we communicate with our tone of voice, but we also communicate with our whole bodies. So if you try to muzzle any aspect of that, it's going to make you less authentic on camera. And guess what? The key to being best on camera is to be you, be authentically you. But the teleprompter can be a barrier to that. So hopefully these 3 tips will help you to be able to navigate it better. One of the best ways to be better at using a teleprompter is to get some practice. And thanks to today's technology, it's really, really easy to do. So in this week's bonus content, I'm going to give you a link to one of my favorite software applications for a teleprompter. It is a voice activated teleprompter software app. And that means that you don't have to set a specific scroll time. the words on the screen will actually move as you say them, which is a huge advantage because you don't want to have a teleprompter that just scrolls at a certain pace the entire way through. You want to have flexibility. So this one actually does that. So I love it. It actually works really well. There is a free version, which might be just fine for you if you just want to practice your skills. There's a more robust one where you have to pay and you can decide if you need the bells or whistles or not. But with that in mind, in order to get that link, you can go to speakerdynamics.com/bonus content. Once again, it's speakerdynamics.com/bonus content. And I'll have the link in there to the software app for the teleprompter, the voice activated teleprompter that I use and have used for a long time. And hopefully it'll give you an opportunity to practice in the privacy of your own office or your own home. So hopefully this has helped. And I appreciate you taking the time to listen to this week's Speaker Tips Spotlight. Until next time, everybody.